You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm here today with Marilois and Jenna from Mediastruction. And first thing we'd love to hear about is the origin story of Mediastruction, but we've got a lot to talk about with regards to how media is changing and what areas of the market are underserved with media. So why don't you start with the origin story, Marilois?
Well, I'd like to say there's a super sophisticated business plan, backed into Mediastruction, but really I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I couldn't find the job and the culture that I wanted. So I decided to create it. And in terms of our intentional focus on mid-sized markets, that was really just because it's fun. Those are brands that we can get really close to the business, executive leadership, and really focus on the work that we're doing as it impacts results. So it's much more difficult to have that with, large publicly traded companies.
Yeah, I mean, in my day job running Did It, we also service primarily the middle market. One thing that we find, that we like about it is there's enough data to be able to make data-driven decisions. Mm-hmm. But as you said, we often get to have sort of executive level contacts. So before we jump to you, Jenna, what should the smaller marketers do? Because they have a data deficit in comparison to the middle and larger marketers. And so they don't have the statistical relevance of making media decisions that the larger marketers do.
I think there's some opportunities for the smaller brands. I mean, if I think about, say, e-commerce, they're building a business on, social media platforms. And of course, those are AI driven. So there's a ton of, autonomy there for making, decisions and about optimizing their campaigns. But even small data sets can be modeled depending on how you organize it. So, if you're accustomed to, annual data or big data sets, it could be tricky, but maybe look at your data hourly and compare, correlations that way. So there are creative ways that even small brands can use data to improve.
Great. So on to you, Jenna. Adweek named you a media all-star, right? So you're known for innovation, and clearly innovation is something that you can do if you have executive level buy-in. So what attracted you to join Marilois?
Well, first it was Marilois herself. She and I met a few years ago originally through mutual contacts in the industry. And it was very clear from the start. First of all, she's a strong leader. I'm sure you'll pick up on in this interview. She knows what she wants. She knows how to get it. She's got a lot of great qualities like that. But business-wise, I mean, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics, 20% of small businesses fail in the first year and half by their fifth. And I'm looking at this very strong leader who's been running a company for about a decade. So she clearly knows what she's doing, and that's always great to have when you're evaluating sort of who you're going to be working with and alongside. The second was really just this opportunity around kind of helping shape and build a robust digital practice. So a lot of clients, especially in B2B, have gone from things like trade shows to these massive shifts in digital. And, helping be a part of shaping that was extremely interesting to me. I'm kind of like a serial entrepreneur. That's kind of my go-to. I'm kind of like an entrepreneur wannabe. I've always built new practice areas within existing companies, and even before they have names. When I first jumped into the programmatic world, programmatic wasn't a word yet. I was calling it platform media, very literally buying media on platforms. So the idea of doing like a brand new thing was very interesting to me. And last, it was really the company positioning. It felt very modern and forward leaning to me to put a stake in the ground and say middle market is underserved, and this is going to be my audience, and have data science be sort of at the core of everything in a real way, not just a talk about it way, where you can point to multiple instances of data and data science being sort of the fuel for the company engine. So those are my big selling points to say this is right. This is a good fit for me.
Great. Well, that actually leads me into my next question, which is about data modeling. And a lot of media agencies and media buying agencies claim to be heavy into data modeling, and they claim to be very data centric, and they talk about data pools and data lakes, and and the buzzwords are all there, right? But it's very hard for the marketer making agency decisions to sort of know the difference between sizzle and actually being able to deliver. So how are you guys able to deliver against, how is your data modeling different from just the checkbox that all the other media agencies put out there in their sell sheets and websites?
Sure. So our data is different. We own it in-house. And remember, I was talking about being closer to the business results and executive leadership, and really storytelling around data is similar. So if we're that closely aligned, and we have our data scientists in-house, they not only understand building algorithms and bespoke solutions, but they understand media and media's application to those. So I think our ability to let the data decide what model is appropriate, and then to have a real conversation about the KPI and how we're going to reverse engineer the plan to meet that, what methodology we'll use out of the hundreds that are available for advanced attribution, is different than a lot of agencies that are sort of like outsourcing that or using that as an add-on to the media plan.
Great. That's very useful. The one thing that's clear in digital in particular is the speed of change. There's new stuff happening all the time. And so it's evolved a lot. What trends are you guys paying attention to right now? What's your area of focus? How do you find that balance between the shiny objects that the platforms keep dangling in front of you and the stuff that actually works?
Well, I think some of it is honestly, I guess, in a really simple way. It's back to basics, I think, in a lot of ways. One of the big things for me is quality, just in a very basic sense of the word. A lot of the discussions over the past some number of years, maybe decade, have been about things like viewability, brand safety, the tools that can power those things that make it okay for an ad to be shown, but don't necessarily account for, is this a good place for a brand's ad to be? Does it make sense for an ad to be here? Looking at things like real content relevancy, or what people are searching for, or how they're searching. Is it through voice? Is it through, just old-fashioned typing? But it's kind of like this idea of flipping advertising on its head a bit. And rather than segment people by dimensions of those people and kind of put them into the buckets, it's sort of listening, observing, figuring out who people are and what they actually want, and really making a concerted effort to make sure that the ads are really relevant to the people that you're reaching. So that's one thing. And, Marilois mentioned AI when she was talking sort of about the data component, but, a lot of this is AI. For a long time, we were talking about sort of machine learning, which is sort of a subset of, but this is really like, there are a lot of applications for AI which is essentially teaching a machine to behave like a human and think like a human. But there's a lot of application for using AI to observe sights and sounds and use it for writing and written content, Facebook ads, for example, that are going to be kind of personalized, that can be written in real time. but that whole notion of just being a little bit more concerted in how you're placing ads, I would say is one of the big ones for me. I could talk about these topics forever. The second is just sort of it's consumer first nowadays. Consumers have a choice in whether or not their data is collected. There's regulations around their privacy and how you can use data about them. So, for advertisers, we have to shift to, reliance on opt-in, reliance on first-party data. And it's not about finding a workaround. I think in the past it's, we can't do this, but maybe we can do this instead. This is like a new norm. So it's a thing to pay attention to. And again, just ethics, quality, like this is a big theme, thinking about people.
Great. It's you made me, you reminded me of something I've told my team when I talk to them about sort of strategy through execution, is I talk about campaigns working best when it's the right message against the right audience at the right time and the right price. And so obviously as media buyers, you control several of those levers, right? But you typically don't control the creative, in other words, the message, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the disconnects I've seen is sometimes the media people won't talk back to the creative people and say, oh, by the way, for this particular really important segment of our audience, we don't feel like the creative is quite resonating. Do you find yourself sort of pushing back and providing positive or constructive feedback to creative teams with regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly happens more less in a pushback sense, I'd say, and more in a collaborative sense. We partner with quite a few creative agencies, and they're all amazing. And I've seen over the years folks that are at creative shops getting more interested in how their creative is performing. Mm-hmm. And just wanting to know what people are responding to so that they can do better. So the dialogues have gotten more two-way. I've found, at least, and has been our experience at Mediastruction, which is a great thing. But one note, Kevin, is there's also like the brand itself that sort of has a responsibility for their business to do well, if they're paying attention to their own content as well. So it could be in things like responsive websites, so that when people are navigating to you, they're seeing things that they've actually searched for or sought out in a very interesting way, versus having a singular website or just a handful of landing pages that might be kind of tested against each other. And, things like chatbots, like let's have a conversation with your consumers and use AI in that way, even if you don't have necessarily the staff to sort of be on the phone with every single individual person. But those applications content wise are, I would say, just as relevant as the ads themselves, if not more so.
And I would say I've seen Jenna use data to storytell around creative, response and efficacy. So, if you're trending, data visualization over time, and you can see that you can kind of start to see the journey and see which creative iterations or touch points that your customers are engaging with more frequently. It does tell the story of which call to action or, colors or just all kinds of visual elements. Performance.
Yeah, you mentioned touch points, and obviously agencies are often thinking about all the advertising and marketing related touch points, whether they're earned media or paid media. Mm-hmm. But some of the most important touch points that the consumer has is with the brand itself, right? And another thing that I've discussed directly with clients and with my team is no amount of great media or marketing is going to overcome a bad brand experience, right? And so I think it's important, and it's great that you guys have the ability to be discussing with senior management the holistic view, right? And this idea, like if you make a promise in your media and marketing, you have to be able to fulfill that promise, with your brand. Do you find that you end up taking a fairly strategic role, given the fact that the mid-market, you do have this ability to talk to the senior management about things like what's the brand experience? What are the experiential touch points?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we lead that conversation, but I think that we can have a seat at the table. I'll give you a great example. One of the media mix model methodologies we use is built on a simulation platform, and it ingests all kinds of data, of course, the traditional sales and media touch points, but it also has behavioral algorithms. So you can use brand tracking data, consumer perceptions about certain brand features, levels of awareness, even if you have research around the strength of your creative, especially in comparison to your competitors, you can kind of ingest that as a data set, and it'll provide for you like the strength of your media or a recommended media mix based in context of that brand health. So I think that, there isn't we're all working towards the same end. So whether it's SEO or whether it's the brand building team or brand tracking team or the media or the creative team, there's a ton of synergy there. So we're seeing more and more often, not only a seat at the table, but sometimes like, okay, let's have this initial conversation about what we want our message crafted and how we want it to convey. But like, before we get too deep into that, let's see where our consumers are engaging and kind of build out that channel mix first. And then go back to the creative to resonate within that channel.
That's great. That's great. One thing that the industry on the publisher side, platform side, agency, and direct to the consumer, everyone's fretting about the cookie apocalypse, the coming cookie apocalypse. Of course, it's been active in Safari and most of Firefox for ages already. And so they're wondering if it's going to push us back into what I guess they'd call the Stone Age of media, which was Tide and Unilever sponsoring the soap operas and creating an entirely new genre where they have very, broad targeting buckets and not the super niche stuff that we've gotten used to now. How are you guys sort of future proofing against that? Is it going to be sort of a back to the future? Are we going to be back to, very blunt levels of targeting, or do you feel like there'll still be a lot of micro targeting opportunities?
I'll answer the first part of that, and I'll let Marilois add in as well, because she's got a lot of great ideas on this topic. The first thing I'll say is a little bit of a sidebar just on cookies and third-party data in general. There's I've always kind of had a rule with teams of mine that might be doing digital buying, which is if you don't know the source of the data and how the data is collected, we're not going to use it. Which I think is a nice way of saying that the quality of the data matters. I want to know that it's reputable data that we're using, and that we're reaching the right consumers, not that they just have a label and a platform that this is a person who does X for a behavior. So I like to think we've been a bit forward leaning in terms of how things were done in the past, and being selective in how we use data. And you're absolutely right. This is like a new normal of not being reliant on cookies. And I feel like as an organization, it's been on our mind for quite some time. We're already taking steps to get ready. We're very okay with not using cookies as a tracking measure. So we're ready. We're good. Marilois can probably speak to some of the specifics because there are active things we've done to kind of future proof.
So there's some technology solutions that we're working on to level set walled gardens, because what Jenna would tell you is at the end of the day, there's just going to be a lot of walled gardens. They're just going to proliferate. So the biggest challenge we have as an agency is how do we optimize across walled gardens? How do we measure that cross-pollination effect? Because consumers don't live in walled gardens. They like to traverse walled gardens, right? So we are building models to solve for that. But I have sort of a cultural point of view on that issue, and that is, I don't want to be tracked. Like, I feel like consumers need to be respected, and their experience, back to your point earlier, Kevin, about the sort of how people experience the brand. We don't want creepy stalkers. Sometimes discovery is fun. I might want to learn about a new car or furniture or home decorating or skincare product, or name a category that I don't necessarily want to be tracked by someone I visited once. I enjoy discovery of new things and then curate it. So I think there is an opportunity for brands. I think culturally, so many agencies, their performance metrics they're accustomed to presenting are so based on cookies that's the big freak out. It's not digital advertising won't work anymore. It's just that the way we present the metrics is going to look different. And I think there's an opportunity for us to start having that conversation now that the can's been kicked a little bit longer.
Right. One other thing that I think has been fascinating over the years is that as more and more media has become digital, that means more and more media has been distributed on an auction-based model. So I've had to explain to some of our clients in particular, if the CMOs are a little bit older, that back in the day when it was insertion orders and buying TV spots and radio spots and print, you could get a volume discount. Like as you bought more, it got cheaper. And that it's actually the opposite in digital. As you buy more, because you're grabbing it away from your competitors, it gets more expensive, particularly in search, which is very inelastic. And so that's been sort of a very difficult concept to get across, because people were sort of used to this idea of like, well, wait, I want a volume discount, I'm buying more. And, it's just not that way in digital media. Certainly some channels are fairly inelastic, meaning you can still buy a lot more and you're not paying materially much more on a CPM basis. But, it's an interesting concept. And I think it's somewhat of for media planners and buyers who've been around a long time, it's been a little bit of a shift. Have you found that your clients have also sometimes sort of not understood that we're in an auction and, if we want it more, we have to pay more for it?
I mean, I'll start by answering Kevin a traditional background, and then I'll let Jenna add on to that. But I mean, expensive compared to what? Like compared to what you're going to pay for live linear TV? Compared to what you're paying for, trade magazines? Certainly not. So it's a little bit of a, again, hyper focus on the metrics without context of the bigger picture. So that's part of the conversation. In terms of the integrity of the CPMs, that's probably a different one.
Right.
Yeah, I think it can be, if I'll start by saying a lot of brands we work with kind of understand the concept of return on investment, which it really, or return on ad spend, however you want to look at it. Like that's a concept that's not new, that directly applies to biddable media buying. Back in the day, we just call it fair market value. But what does that mean if you can't measure it and tie it to business results and prove that paying a bit more on CPM might actually yield you more in your business metric? So I think that's a huge part of why we heavily intertwine our measurement and data modeling offering into everything we do, because you can't just say we might have to pay a bit more without proving the yield on the other end. So we sort of do that end-to-end connection. But I've found that if you do keep it in terms of return language, it's an easier discussion. Like that's the thing that makes sense to even folks that did not kind of grow up with biddable media.
That's interesting, because ages ago in 1992, when I was at McCann Erickson and I was on the account side, I had a great academic discussion with the director of media, where we were talking about media efficiency against the target audience. And he said something that I continue to remember to this day, which was essentially, at the right price, I'll buy any media, right? And because it was all about then doing the math on the back end to figure out, well, what was the effective cost against the target audience? And my counter argument, which again was really more for academic purposes, was, yeah, but then there's going to be a whole bunch of people who don't need dentures, who see denture advertising, and a whole bunch of people seeing diaper advertising who don't need diapers and will never need them, or may not need them for years, or have already gone past that stage. And he was like, yeah, but you have to focus on, the effective part of the audience, and there'll always be a waste factor, right? So how do you guys think about sort of that super narrow targeting where you have lower waste factor, but you're paying more, versus this idea that, well, we can go broader and include the serendipity, which you sort of mentioned, Marilois, where like, okay, a person sort of maybe stumbles across a creative message and they weren't perfectly on target, but maybe they will be in market at some point. So how do you think about that trade-off between cost and targeting on media?
I mean, I would circle back to Jenna's point that it's all about the return on ad spend or return on investment, but we think about it holistically. I can't not think about it holistically. Like, we can talk about the experimentation in various lines or segments or placements, but at the end of the day, as I said, people don't live in walled gardens. They don't live in lines. They don't live in audience segments. They're exposed to hundreds of touch points throughout the day. So if you make a sports analogy, sure, you can have a star quarterback. If he doesn't have a receiver, what good is the team? So I think, the way that we have that conversation is always across channel, across lines. And again, harken back to performance overall.
One of the benefits, Kevin, to working with the mid-market is these teams are so invested in the business outcome that one place where we have the privilege of kind of driving the strategy is on media budget allocation. So prioritizing those like highest yield audience and figuring out, how to reach them first and what is that going to cost. And in some cases, the quote unquote waste factor audiences that you're mentioning might be ripe for testing. You might learn something about folks or subsegments, subgroups of that larger kind of broader audience that you didn't know much about. And I think being able to prioritize how much you spend to sort of which groups of people, naturally the waste factor kind of falls into place. You can do it in a smart way.
I'm going to add something else to that. Hearing you, Jenna, is the value of modeling where you can tie online exposure to offline response is super helpful in that sort of waste conversation, because we've modeled, digital plans to business leads that may be happening on a phone or some other non-digital method. And when you think about the media mix in that way, and you're able to create those, robust advanced attribution models, then you can see where that what might look like digital waste because of those digital metrics is actually driving, a valuable response. It's just that you haven't been able to measure it digitally. Right.
Well, final question is really like the continued disruption. There's still a lot going on, particularly in the addressable TV and CTV space. It's one area where we still have a high level of addressability with the audiences at the household level and sometimes at the individual level. So what else is coming down the pike? What are you guys excited about as the landscape continues to shift?
I'm extremely excited about in particular for the variation in types of advertising, like how advertising comes to life, I guess is a good way to say it. With things even like CTV, but beyond that, it includes social platforms, things of that nature. There are just so many ways to advertise to consumers that for all intents and purposes are richer. You've got live stream, you've got ephemeral content, you've got video content, and the idea that ads can be really rich experiences, and be more like experiences rather than a 300 by 250, static banner or something to that effect. That's exciting to me. Just the evolving nature of how we think about advertising.
I think in some ways COVID has been helpful in experimentation because brands are the consumer connection with digital devices and digital content has just exploded, and the ability to connect in person, whether you're a brick and mortar or you're a B2B, that's diminished. So there's those two things happening at the same time. I feel like we've had more conversations around experimentation and openness to experimentation than I've seen in the past 5 years. So I'm excited about that because it's fun for us to try new things.
I would agree on that. It was sort of like for many years, through no fault of the agencies or sometimes the fault of certain agencies, the media plan looked like a Xerox of last year's media plan with a few things moved around, right? And that was the one thing that the pandemic caused, is it caused almost everyone to agree that, all right, everything's different, so therefore my old media plan must be wrong, right? And so it suddenly opened up the, that sort of wake up moment. Said, and now it was probably bad that 2 or 3 years, passed, but there was never that catalyst to really dig down and start with a clean slate. So I would agree with you that's been a good wake up call to the marketing teams at the clients, and also to some agencies who perhaps had been a little bit lax in revisiting media plans.
Very true.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining me. This has been really fun, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great
Kevin,
to
this
be
was
here.
great. Thank you.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.